all of this eliminated. They would have us locked up.
No, we wouldn't. He hasn't the faintest idea. But why don't we discuss this a bit later on, when we have questions and answers?
Nick Griffin!
The thing is that the Indian Americans fought tooth and nail to preserve their hold on this continent, and fair play to them, but they lost. And your people, the secular democratic people, the lesbians, the homosexuals, well, you see, personally, I'd shove you back in the closet.
Talk about David Copeland and the nail bombs.
Are you not aware?
What about David Copeland?
Are you not aware that the basis of fascism
What about the
is the
nail
use
bomb?
of violence, threats, intimidation, and shouting down your opponent?
Talk about your terrorist supporting activities.
Let's hear about your terrorist action!
Present danger? David Copeland wasn't a clear present danger?
You're a clear
David
present
Copeland
danger!
left the British National Party because he decided it was democratic and it wasn't for him.
But not because you asked him to leave, because he wanted to. You would have supported him.
Yeah, of course it did. Of course it did.
How many people did he kill? How many people did he kill?
Let's not go on a minute, shall we? I'll answer every single question later on. But I'm not going to answer all.
How many terrorists come out of your organization?
There are some people who are actually from this university, as opposed to bust in from Detroit, who want to hear intelligent questions and intelligent questions. There's a fair few noisy feminists here, so let's look at what feminists would lose in Islamic Europe or an Islamic Republic. You lose your right not to have your labia and your clitoris hacked off and have your vagina sewn up. Because that's what happens in many Islamic states.
What?
I'm talking about what happens in many Islamic states to women. You would be second-class citizens.
Oh my God.
You would not be allowed to give evidence.
You should not be allowed to speak anywhere. Go home.
No. Indeed, if we had Europe or America threatened by radical Christians who wanted, for instance, to go back to burning old ladies to death for talking to their cats, then I would be against that as well. But it isn't a clear and present danger. See, the young lady over there would be, with a big voice, she's actually pretty enough to end up in Islamic slave market. And that is what would happen in a fundamentalist Islamic Europe. There are 200,000 girls from places like Russia trafficked as sex slaves to the Middle East every year. What's wrong with you feminists that you don't give a damn about women being sex trafficked to the Middle East? Why don't you care about them? It's really most peculiar. Very strange indeed.
You're fucking...
It's happening partly through mass immigration, which I know that some of you here think is a good thing. But mass immigration transforms societies. And the mass immigration... Well, do you really want to have your society transformed into something in which women aren't even allowed to drive? Is that actually what you want? And we don't want to rape and lose this planet.
You still deny the Holocaust? How many more David Copelands are in your organization?
Okay, one question at a time. Do I deny the Holocaust?
You can't do things at once, multitask.
I don't run the underground. As a matter of fact, some of them were. Yes.
Are you still a Holocaust denier?
Let me explain my position upon the Holocaust. Okay?
Yes and no.
And it's this, that I have in the past said very rude things about the Holocaust.
Rude?
Which doesn't make me an anti-Semite. You have people like Norman Finkelstein who have said very rude things about the way it's used as a business, and the way various people have said very rude things about the way it's used to justify the oppression of the Palestinians. Now, I was angry with the way that the Holocaust was used as a huge moral club to prevent any discussion of things such as the preservation of nationality and such as problems relating to mass immigration. And on account of that, I said very rude things about it. I've never denied it. I have no doubt whatsoever. I've never doubted that vast numbers of entirely innocent Eastern European Jews were murdered by the Nazis and their allies during the Second World War.
How many more days do you have?
At Nuremberg, one of the figures, 20 million. 20 million. That's the figure that was announced at Nuremberg, and that's the figure that I believe.
On the Cook report, you said that only a couple hundred died.
Let's continue looking at
on the
the...
Cook report, you said only a couple hundred died. You're lying right now. You have said in the past that it's not true.
Are you a reporter? Yes.
President Wigginton should know.
What about Orange Taylor?
Shut up! Sit down! Sit down! Sit down! Sit down! No, sit down! Sit down! I'm not done! Sit down! Sit down! Sit down! I'm talking. No, sit down and let me finish my question. Sit down and shut the fuck up. I'm talking. Them trying to actually assimilate themselves into American society. We don't have that record. But what do we see with organizations that identify with white nationalism? What we see is terrorism. We see lynchings. And we see iterations of that today. With the news thing I'm sure you probably heard about. There was a black woman that was raped by 6 white people a couple weeks ago. Okay? So I'm going to give you a chance to respond. I'll give you a chance to respond.
Listen,
but what we see here is a contradiction that white nationalists are the ones that have been terrorists in America, not Muslims. So please respond to that contradiction.
First of all, we point out Muslims being here since that very early stage, because they were all over as slaves. With respect, the majority of black people in America today are here because they were sold into slavery by Islamic slave traders to Christian and Jewish slave traders. Just as now in places like Darfur, where you have a war, a genocide against the animist Christian South by the Arab Muslim North. And I understand how many black people in America have converted to Islam and feel it's a wonderful thing. I've met members of the Nation of Islam, and I've seen what, for instance, they do in communities which have been ravaged by drugs, and what they do is a good thing. So I can understand you having this passionate attachment to Islam, but don't let that fool you into accepting propaganda, because, as I say, traditionally Islam is the great slaving religion of the world. I'm sure a true case of a black girl being raped by a white man. Equally, the majority of interracial rapes in this country are by black men on white women.
No, not true. Not true. I thought this was supposed to be educational.
You look it up on the internet. You'll find it.
In general, it's white men and white girls.
36,000 families.
I'll tell you what, you go to Detroit tomorrow night and walk down the streets of some other drugs.
Hi. You seem to be applying the issues of like Muslims across the world and trying to say this will happen in America. However, the Pew Research Foundation found otherwise. They found that in the survey of American Muslims, they found them to be moderate, middle class, mainstream. They do not support the radical jihadist movement. They on average have more money and more education than the population at large. Why now, why are you coming now to say we should stop Muslims in America? Why not look to them as a model for how relations that seem to work here could work in Britain, work in Europe, and work around the world?
It's a very sensible point. I'd say part of the experience of Europe, that the first Muslims that came there were certainly moderate, even the ones who were very poor. And most of the ones who were brought to Britain were extremely poor. They were brought to do jobs that the bosses didn't want to pay decent wages for. But yeah, the first ones were remarkably moderate. The second generation are less moderate. The third generation are less moderate still. And it's partly because they are being
Where are you getting this information from?
By the House of Saud and its allies, including in Iran on the Shia side. But it's also because Muslims are enjoined by the Quran that they shouldn't cut up rough and start to push too hard until they are 10% of the population. And it's what their book. Now, you must understand, it's nothing like the Bible in some ways. Any good Muslim believes that the Quran is dictated. I know that it's dictated by Allah to Muhammad. That's correct, isn't it? In a good Muslim's eyes, the Quran is literally the word of God as dictated to Muhammad. And it cannot be changed. It must be obeyed. So, Surah 8, Ayat 65 says that until you get to 10%, until you get to 10% of the population, you can shorten the prayers. In other words, you can play down how Islamic you are. Once you get to 10%, you have a religious duty to use aggression and force and violence to help the spread of Islam through radical military jihad. It's what Allah told you you must do.